minute and then we'll start. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for joining us on your Sunday evening. I, Kaifi Ansari, on behalf of Speaking from Margin, welcome you all. Before starting our lecture, I would like to briefly introduce our forum, Speaking from Margin. Speaking from Margin is an academic platform for research scholars, socio-political activists, and students to engage with contemporary discourses in social sciences. It attempts at building academic solidarities for achieving social justice in higher education. We use this space to build solidarity among researchers from various marginal locations to engage with evolving knowledge paradigms within social science. In past, we have organized several lecture series and book discussions, which have received overwhelming responses from academic community and beyond. Some of our past speakers include Professor Kanchailaya, Professor Rajiv Bhargav, Professor Satish Deshpande, Professor Maitri Chaudhary, Dr. Sudhir Kumar Suthar, Professor Zoya Hassan, Professor N. Sukumar, and many more. Through our Margin Speak lecture series, we try to bring to our audience and participants the opportunity to interact with experts from various social science disciplines with the objective of facilitating aspiring researchers in getting a better hold of contemporary debates in social science and equip themselves better with a variety of issues laying therein. So this series is also a small attempt on our part to bring to the fore certain issues which have hitherto remained at the margins of the mainstream academia and initiate conversations along those lines among the academic community and beyond. With this short introduction today, we all are here to engage, discuss, and learn about the issue which has been over the surface over last few months, because of certain politics, debate, and discussion around it. So it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to hear, learn, and discuss more about the issue from a person who has been engaged and has worked a lot of work since many decades on the issue of Pasmanda discourse in Indian politics, not only from politics perspective, but from a sociological perspective too. So I introduce here Professor Khalid Ansari, who is an assistant professor in Azim Premji University. He is a sociologist interested in post-colonial modernity, democratic deepening, anti-caste movements, and transformative politics in general. His DPhil doctoral work explored the conceptual relationship between pluralism, democracy, and internal minorities through the case study of anti-caste Pasmanda-Muslim movement in India in University of Humanistic Studies, Netherlands. He has emphasized the limitation of dominant religious lens in understanding contemporary minority politics. Professor Khalid advocates and engages passionately with democratic social movements. And before joining Azim Premji University, he has been Associate Professor of Sociology at Local University and has chaired Ambedkar Center for Exclusion Studies and Transformative Actions. He has experience of over 20 years in academia and social sector. And before joining academia in 2013, he has worked in various community development programs, such as he was Manson Met Even Missy, ActionAid, and the Gandhi Foundation. Now I would like to introduce some of his published work. And as we know, he has lectured widely in popular spaces. So a few of his works I would like to tell about, which are a few edited chapters in books. His most recent publications is an article titled "Revisiting the Minority Imagination: An Inquiry into Anti-Caste Pasmanda-Muslim Discourse in India." His forthcoming chapter in edited book, Like a Sackcloth Patch on Muslin, the Anti-Caste Pasmanda Narration of the Muslim Social Science in Studies of Religion and Everyday Life, from Oxford University Press. In 2021, he published Pluralism and Post-Minority Condition, Reflections on the Pasmanda-Muslim Discourse in North India, in the pluriverse of human rights, the diversity of struggle for dignity. He has written many journal articles. A few of them are Pluralization Challenges to Religion as a Social Imaginary, Anti-Caste Contestation, and the Muslim Quota in India. Now, I would like to invite Professor Khalid Ansari to speak about our today's lecture, Pasmanda-Muslim Discourse and Indian Politics, from Categorisation to Conceptualization. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, speaking from the Margin team, and Vidya Sagar for reaching out to me, and Kaifi for moderating this session. So thank you for having me here. Am I audible? Is my voice clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is the duration? I mean, how do you plan the session?
Sorry, sir, you are supposed to speak for 40 minutes, and then after that we can take question up.
Okay. So I'll begin with the categorization part first, and then move to the conceptualization part. So Pasmanda is a Persian word which means those who have fallen behind. So it is an umbrella term that incorporates the backward Muslims, that is those Muslims who converted from the erstwhile Shudra caste, occupational caste, like the Julahas, the Rain, the Safis, and other communities. And then there are obviously the Dalit Muslims, which converted from caste, the untouchable caste, so-called, historically. And the third group is the Adivasi Muslims. So Muslims like the Bhil, the Gonds, the Van Gujars, and so on and so forth. So overall, Pasmanda has proximity to the term Bahujan, and it includes these three groups: the backward Muslims, the Dalit Muslims, and the Adivasi Muslims. In terms of numerics, in terms of population, the estimates are that the Pasmanda Muslims constitute about 85% of Muslim population. And the Pasmanda movement, which started in the 1990s, and I'll come to that in a while. So it is basically mobilizing these lower caste and peripheral Muslim communities against the hegemony of the privileged caste groups, which are known as the Ashraf. And as some of you would know, Ashraf means noble. It is also a parallel term to the term Arya, which also means noble, right? So the Shah Muslims, their numeric population would be around 15%, but they are hegemonic in the Muslim political and social and cultural sphere. And one of the pursuit of the Pasmanda movement is to contest this hegemony and democratize the Indian Muslim community, and and also Pasmanda movement sees itself as a part of the larger uh, democratic and anti-caste movement. So, so that is the broad description of the category. How does the Pasmanda movement categorize the Muslim social sphere, political sphere, in terms of caste? Uh, Now, when we come to the conceptualization part, the Pasmanda movement is struggling with a few logics and binaries that were installed in the colonial period. And they have been uncritically extended in the post-colonial phase also. So I'll just briefly lay down the broad logics that the movement is struggling with. One of the first is obviously, if you look at the Indian political space historically, then there is a distinction between the immigrant Muslims, the Turks, Afghans, Mughals, Persians, Arabs, Abyssinians, Africans, and so on and so forth. And these immigrant Muslims, they constituted the ruling class for about 6 centuries, from 1191 to roughly 1757, if one has to work with dates. So that is the period when the immigrant Muslim class, which came from outside to South Asia, they were hegemonic and they were the ruling classes, whether as in the form of the Delhi Sultanate or in the form of the Mughal Sultanate, and so on and so forth. Now, these immigrant Muslims, they are contrasted with the native indigenous converts, right? Mainly lower caste and peripheral tribes. And the term Pasmanda broadly encompasses these native indigenous converts to Islam. Uh, Historically, this distinction uh, was there, and the Muslim elite has had much closer relation with the so-called Hindu elite than their own co-brethren or their own community members, which came from the peripheral caste or tribal communities, Adivasi communities. But the colonial regime, it introduced certain logics. Uh, and one of the first logic was that it framed religion as an overarching category. So if you look at before the colonial regime, religious identities and communities were much more fuzzier. But the introduction of the colonial state, the administration, colonial census, ethnography, and so on and so forth, uh, and the politics of numerics, because numbers became very important in the late colonial period when uh, when semi-parliamentary practices were introduced. For instance, in 1920, uh, the Montague-Chelmsford reforms. So after that, the semi-parliamentary practices were introduced, and numbers became very important. So one of the first moves was the privileging of religion as the overarching category. The second colonial move was to frame Hinduism as a tolerant but inegalitarian tradition, and Islam as an egalitarian but a fanatic and intolerant tradition. So that was that was the second logic which was installed during the colonial regime, and which is a problematic logic because if you read South Asian history, then then the Hindu sphere has not been so tolerant. And there are also elements of egalitarianism within the Hindu tradition. And if you look at Islam, so there is a strong plural and tolerant tradition in Islam. in the form of Sufism and so on and so forth. And Islam, as it is practiced in South Asia, it has been very hierarchical. It has been very caste-based. So that was the second logic, that Islam as egalitarian but intolerant, and Hinduism as tolerant but inegalitarian, infected with caste. One could go into details, but I just want to flag the broad logics here without going into the historical details. The third distinction was between Abrahamic traditions and Indic traditions. And it has a long genealogy starting from 1780s onwards. William Jones' text, where he first introduced this concept of Punya Dharma, on Punya Bhumi and Matra Bhumi. So this notion of fatherland and holy land. So many people attribute that to Savarkar, but it has a longer genealogy than that. It's a very Orientalist colonial construction, this notion of Punya Bhumi and Matra Bhumi. And then obviously Savarkar weaponized that in a particular way for his own Hindu nationalist project. But even other icons, the nationalist icons, like Gandhi, Ambedkar, even Nehru for that matter, they were either comfortable with this dichotomy, even the Muslim elite and the Christian elite, they were comfortable with this Indic Abrahamic distinction. And so that was another logic where religions and faith traditions were conflated with their origins. Now, this is very interesting because religions or faith traditions, they are not only spiritual practices, but they're also intellectual systems. They're also knowledge systems in their own right. And this modernist nationalist elite, if you look at their works, if you look at their writings, they are very comfortable in learning from Marx, John Dewey, Leo Tolstoy, and in the case of the Hindu nationalist groups, from Mussolini, Hitler, and so on and so forth. In the case of the Muslim elite, from scholars in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and so on. So if you look at the nationalist elite, or even Muslim and other elites, so they're all learning from outside, embracing knowledge traditions from outside. Even our constitution borrows heavily from other constitutions. So it's very interesting that it's only in the context of faith traditions that this origin question is very hyper visibilized. So the roots, the origins of religions, faith traditions, they are hyper visibilized at the expense of the historical fact that faiths travel. And faiths are knowledge systems, they travel, just like any other knowledge system travels. And it is translated differently in different space and time contexts. So this dichotomy between Abrahamic and Indic faith traditions, it is also a very colonial Orientalist faith tradition, which was embraced by many anti-colonial and other elites. And it has also found its place in the Indian Constitution in Article 25B. So if we have time, we can go into detail later. And then because of this overarching category of faith to access South Asia, this overarching category of religion to access South Asia, most of the discourses here, they started privileging the external other. So when we talk of an identity, and identity encompasses a lot of experience, self-definition of communities, how other people perceive communities, and so on and so forth. And identity is also linked to our life chances, the opportunities that a person from a particular identity has, whom they will marry, the land relations, and so on and so forth. So the notion of identity is closely connected with people's experiences and also the questions of political economy and so on and so forth. Uh, so if we try to understand the notion of identity, then identity depends not only on the external others, but also on the internal others. So no identity is monolithic. All identity are constructed, they are dynamic, uh, and they evolve and change in relation with the state, in relation with political economy, in relation with political theology, how religions engage with state, and so on and so forth. So identities are not essentialist categories. Identities are always dynamic. And any identity, if one has to understand, then it is not only the external other that is important, but also the internal others. So if you look at the Muslim identity, most of the articulation and discussion on the Muslim identity, it emphasizes the external other, right? The Hindu or the majority community and so on and so forth. And the voices of internal others, like the lower caste, the women, various linguistic groups, the LGBTQI groups, regional variations. So the internal others within the Muslim identity, they are invisibilized. They don't get a place in the table. They are not anywhere in the policy making circles and so on and so forth. So one of my emphasis has been that if we want to understand the Muslim identity, then we have to take both into account the role of the external other and also that of the internal other. Because the Muslim identity, if you only emphasize on the external other, then there is an epistemological consequence of that. We don't get a rounded understanding of the Muslim identity. So, in that sense, if we look at the Pasmanda movement, the Pasmanda movement has been contesting uh, the Muslim, what I call the Muslim minority discourse, the key elements of the Muslim-minority discourse. Uh, and I see Muslim as a religio-cultural category and minority as a statist juridical category. And both the Muslim and the minority as categories, they have been dynamic and they have evolved. So Muslim category has also evolved historically, and the minority category has also evolved. So if you look at the pre-colonial context, then minority encompassed uh, both the so-called backward classes and the religious and linguistic communities. But in the post-colonial phase, there has been an uncoupling of backward classes from minorities. So if you look at the present extent reservation of affirmative action matrix or the minority sphere in India, then the minorities, they are bifurcated into the religious and linguistic minorities, which enjoy constitutional protection, and so they inhabit the domain of the cultural rights. So that is one. And second, obviously, are the SCs, STs, and OBCs, the lower caste and Adivasi sections, which have been granted political rights, right? So the religious and linguistic minorities, they are supposed to be permanent minorities, while the SC, ST, OBCs, uh, they are supposed to be ephemeral, which will eclipse or be annihilated in time, right? So the notion of minority has also changed. And now the category minority is generally conflated with the category Muslim in the public sphere. Similarly, the category Muslim has also evolved historically. So if you go 300 years back, 400 years back, then Muslim would be a very diversified category with various maslaks, with various language groups, regional differentiation, caste-based differentiation, and so on and so forth. But over a period of time, the category Muslim became very monolithic. Uh, so even the category Muslim has traveled, the category minority has traveled. And when I define the Muslim minority space, So it is a combination, it is an articulation between the logic of religion as a cultural religious category, Muslim as a cultural religious category, and minority as a status juridical category. When you combine these two logics, when you articulate these two logics, we arrive at the Muslim minority discourse. And there are three key elements of the Muslim minority discourse. One is the identity and the religio-cultural. So the first element of the Muslim minority discourse is the notion of identity and the religio-culture. The second element is security and interreligious violence, which we call communal violence in popular parlance. And the third are the debates around equity and affirmative action. So the Muslim minority discourse, which is monopolized and hegemonized by the Ashraf classes, the Muslim privileged castes and classes, it unifies these three key elements: identity, communalism, and affirmative action, equity, and presents a monolithic notion of Indian Muslim community. So I'll just give you an instance. For example, Sayyid Shahabuddin, he stated once that for a Muslim at the personal level, his religious identity is supreme, rising above race, language, geography, or political jurisdiction. Indeed, he is not prepared to trade his religious identity at any price, bread, profession, vocation, political ideology, or national identity. So broadly, that is what the Muslim minority identity signifies. It unifies these three elements and presents the notion of Muslim as a monolithic space, as a category, as a community with unified interests. So if you look at identity, obviously the idea is that Muslim constitutes a community, and there is a monolithic representation of Muslim. If you come to communalism, then the notion is that Muslim is the pure victim. All Muslims are equally affected by the communal riots, and so communalism is a practice, or it's an event which affects all Muslims equally. When you come to affirmative action, the long-standing demand has been a separate quota for all Muslims. So those three elements have been the key elements of the Muslim minority discourse, which the Pasmanda movement characterizes as an Ashraf Muslim discourse. It deconstructs the Muslim minority discourse and reveals its caste origins and interests. So now this is, so there have been caste movements within Muslims are not new. There has been what I characterize as two waves of the Pasmanda movement. So one is the first wave is the pre-colonial, pre-independence wave, which is represented by the key organization, which is the All India Moment Conference, which was formed in the 1926, was very active from 1937 onwards in the political sphere. So that is the first wave of Pasmanda politics. And the second wave is from 1990s onwards. So if you look at both these waves, then they have been struggling with some of the issues that I have elaborated earlier. So they are both are contesting the Muslim minority politics in their own context, in their own temporal context. So if you look at the first wave of Pasmanda movement, which is the Momin movement, then they created a new identity, the Momin, to galvanize the lower caste Muslims against Ashraf hegemony, especially represented by the Muslim League. So the Momin conference, it characterized the Muslim League as a party of Nawabs, aristocrats, and Ashrafs, and it challenged the two-nation theory and the demand of Pakistan, which was flagged, which was foregrounded by the Muslim League in the pre-1947 period. And one of the major champions of the All India Movement Conference, one of the key icons, was Abdul Kaifi Ansari from Bihar. And he challenged, the Movement Conference challenged the Muslim League from 1937 onwards. And it was a strong voice against the politics of partition. Movement Conference challenged the two-nation theory. It challenged the demand of Pakistan and also took on the Muslim League in the 1945 provincial elections. And Bihar, out of 40 seats, which were reserved for the Muslim electorate, separate Muslim electorate, out of 40 seats, the Movement Conference won 5, and one seat was won by the Congress Party with the support of the Movement Conference. So 6 seats, the Movement Conference registered victory, and all the other seats went to the Muslim League, obviously. So, and also in 1938, one of the members of the Movement Conference, Mr. Noor, he foregrounded the demand for a separate electorate for Moments. So if you recall, from 1909 onward, from the Morley-Minto reforms, there was a separate electorate for all Muslims. From 1925, there were also reservations for Muslims in the civil services and in administrative positions. And for example, Dr. Ambedkar, he raised this demand of a separate electorate for Dalits in the 1932, which culminated in the famous Pune Pact, a compromise position for Baba Sahib because of interventions from Mahatma Gandhi and so on and so forth. So quite similarly, the Movement Conference also raised the demand of a separate electorate for Moments. So they created a distance between the Muslim League, the Muslim electorate, separate electorate, and the Moments. So they wanted a separate electorate for Moments. And they said, we are different from the mainstream Muslim community. So though that cleavage was always there, there was always an anti-caste contestation from the lower caste Muslims, not as visible because of their cultural capital and also because there was no universal adult franchise at that point of time. So if you recall, then in the pre-47, there was a restricted electorate. Not everyone was allowed to vote. So if you look at Austin, so he says only 28% were allowed to vote in 1945 provincial elections. But different regions have different numbers. And many commentators, when it comes to the Muslim community, they suggest that Muslims, only 13 to 14% of the Muslim community was allowed to vote in the 1945 provincial elections. And since this restricted electorate, since the electorate was constructed around income, educational qualifications, and property, so it is only the Ashrafia Muslim sections that were allowed to vote. And in the 1945 elections, which is supposed to be a consensus on Pakistan, most of the Pasmanda votes were not even put to test, right? So again, those are the complexities that one works with in the pre-partition period. In the 1990s, because of the 3 M's, the Mandir movement, the Mandal movement, and the markets, which is the embrace of the neoliberal policies, economic policies. So again, there are all kinds of shifts in the political sphere, and particularly the Mandal Commission report, it included around 82 lower caste Muslims. And so because of the inclusion of 82 lower caste Muslims and the general process of mandalization, it impacted Muslim lower caste as well. And a number of lower caste Muslim organizations that emerged in the 90s period, in the 90s decade. So in Maharashtra, there was the All India Muslim OBC organization led by Kaifi Ansari. In Bihar in 1994, Dr. Ijaz Ali, he launched the All India Backward Muslim Morcha, which in 2000 was rechristened as the All India United Muslim Morcha. In 1998, Ali Anwar, who was a journalist, along with other members, he formed the All India Pasmanda-Muslim Mahaz. And the term Pasmanda was introduced by this organization. and now it is increasingly used to address to the lower caste and peripheral Adivasi Muslims. So that is the second wave of Pasmanda movement, which is also known, also characterized as the Mandalization of Muslim politics in the 90s period. Now, if we come to the critical elements of the Pasmanda counter discourse, then the first key ruptures and key contestations are in the sphere of religion and culture, the religio-cultural questions. So according to the Pasmanda practitioners and intellectuals and ideologues, they feel that the Ashraf cultural value framework, it constitutes the hegemonic norm in Indian Muslim society, and it invisibilizes and inferiorizes lower caste Muslims' perspectives, cultures, and bodies. And there are four critical features of the Ashraf culture that are instrumental in culturally colonizing the Pasmanda Muslims. The first is the disdain for manual labor. So if you look at the Ashraf culture, then there is a disdain for manual labor. Second is the endorsement of hierarchy and reverence for Sayyids as a class. So that is the second feature. So in most of the South Asian theological literature on Islam, it has endorsed caste hierarchies, and there is a reverence for Sayyids as a class. The third is the employment of language, Arabic, Persian, Urdu, as a boundary maintenance mechanism. And the fourth is the privileging of Sharafat as an elite Ashraf culture that embodies particular modes of piety, character building, and taste. So the hierarchical Ashraf culture, it militates against the lower caste Muslim life worlds, denigrating stories, popular idioms, jokes, and proverbs, naturalize and reproduce the stereotypes related to the Pasmanda communities. For instance, the Julahas, they are characterized as foolish and unreliable. Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, the renowned Muslim educationist, he referred to them as Badzat, which means low-born, lousy, ill-bred, or mean. The Halalkhors and Lalbegis are mocked for being engaged in the unclean occupation of sweeping or scavenging and are victims of the practice of untouchability. The women of the Bhattiara caste, traditionally keepers of inns, are supposed to be of suspect sexual character. The Rangres or dyers, they are derided for association with a foul smell because of the base material saresh used for printing. It is made of decomposing leather. The socio-cultural discrimination against the Pasmanda communities, it is manifested in practices like the use of surnames of Pasmanda communities as invectives and curse words. Discrimination against Pasmanda communities during burials in the graveyard and community prayers in the mosque. Spatial segregation in Muslim neighborhoods based on caste. Violent reprisals against inter-caste love marriages. Social boycott, caste atrocity, and extravagant revenge against Pasmanda sections for violating caste norms and hierarchy. So in one of my interviews with a activist of the Pasmanda movement, Mohammad Ibrahim, so he says, and he's an activist who has traveled widely in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So he says, I did not find even a single place that has not faced exploitation, shoshan, repression, daman, or torture, atyachar by the Ashraf. Then he goes on further. The Ashraf, they feel a certain contempt, and he uses the word karahiyat. They feel a certain contempt, karahiyat, hatred, ghina. I mean scorn, ghin. Because these people, Pasmanda, they perform lowly work, they weave, they get drenched in sweat, their clothes emanate foul odor, they clean filth or sell meat, their clothes and utensils are different. So this is a narrative from a Pasmanda activist. So I won't go into the anthropological discussion in detail on caste in Islam. Maybe it will come during the discussions. And Ali Anwar, in his book Masawat Ki Jang, where he articulates the Pasmanda movement in the 90s period, so he locates a legitimating vocabulary for social hierarchy in classical Islamic text themselves. So this notion that caste is a learned behavior among Muslims, it has the Muslims here, they have learned it from the Hindus and so on and so forth. So Aryalvar challenges that, he parallelizes that. He says that in the Indian context, reference is made to the exemplary work Fatwa-e Jahandari, which is written in the 14th century by Turkish scholar Ziauddin Berni, which legitimizes Ashraf supremacy through repeated references to the Quran. Then there are various quotations from various Maulvis in the book Masawat Ki Jang, and there are various fatwas which legitimize caste practices within South Asian Islam. And also Masood al-Falahi's work, Hindustan Mein Zaat Paat or Musalman, it's a rich compendium of these opinions and fatwas from the Muslim ulema themselves. Anwar dubs these clerics as the Manu of Muslims. So he uses the term Manu Mullahs or the Manu of Muslims. So these are ulemas, but they endorse and legitimize caste-based practices, graded inequality within South Asian Islam. So another quotation from Ibrahim, he says about the madrasas, the same old syllabus is being followed for centuries in madrasas because Ashraf control that. They only want to keep us like slaves so that we keep on acknowledging their supremacy, keep on following the Sayyids and Sayyidism, uses the word Sayyid Parasti. So, and also there's a notion of sharafat. So a good Muslim would be someone who wears a sherwani, who wears a particular kind of cap, speaks chaste Urdu, puts on certain itr and scents and perfumes and so on and so forth. And the mother tongue of Muslims, it is supposed to be Urdu, while the Pasmanda activists, they challenge that and they suggest that the mother tongue of Muslims is diverse. It's very regional. So people in Bhojpur, they would speak Bhojpuri. Bengali Muslims would speak Bengali. The Malayalam Muslims in Kerala, they would speak Malayalam and so on and so forth. So this notion that Urdu is the language of Muslims, this is something that Pasmanda discourse, it challenges. So that is the one set of concerns around religion and culture where Pasmanda take on the Ashraf cultural value framework. The second is the engagement with questions of communal violence and secularism. So on both count, in terms of communal violence, Pasmandas, they argue that this politics of communalism, it is fueled by both Hindu and Muslim elites in order to displace the social justice aspirations of the lower caste across religions. So the pan-religion lower caste. So communalism is seen as an intervention by the elite sections in order to reproduce their power. And one of the concerns is that most of the victims in the communal clashes, they are because of class and spatial vulnerability. Most of the places that are attacked during communal violence are slums and shanty towns, where usually the lower caste Pasmanda Muslims live. And also in terms of the caste-class relationship. So most of the poor Muslims would be largely Pasmanda Muslims. So there's a sense that in these communal clashes, it is usually the Pasmanda Muslims that bear the brunt, that are mostly the victims of this violence, while the elite Muslims, they use this victimhood for their own politics and so on and so forth to control the community. So that is one sense, and there is a notion that Hindu majoritarianism cannot be contested unless Muslim majoritarianism, Muslim minoritarianism, or Muslim fundamentalism, it is contest from within. So there is a notion that Hindu communalism and Muslim communalism, there is a symbiotic relationship between the two. And if we have to contest one, then we also have to contest the other. So the Pasmanda practitioners, they have taken a stance against both Hindu nationalism and Muslim nationalism, both Hindu fundamentalism and Muslim fundamentalism. So that is the second set of conceptual engagement. The third, obviously, also secularism. So Pasmanda Muslims have challenged the mainstream social justice left and Congress parties like the Congress for using this fear factor, this fear of the Hindu right, in order to silence the social justice aspirations of the Pasmanda Muslims. And Ali Anwar uses the term bhay dohan, which means profiteering from fear. So Pasmandas challenge both the secular and the communal factions, political parties, because in a sense, both have invisibilized their concerns and their aspirations. The last set of, the last is the question of equity and affirmative action, where the Pasmanda practitioners, they have challenged the notion of a separate Muslim quota. And the argument is that most elite Muslims, they are already overrepresented in power structures, and they constitute a historical ruling class. They are not socially backward in that sense. So reservations, only the Pasmanda Muslims, that is the backward Muslims, Dalit Muslims, and the Adivasi Muslims, they should be considered for reservations. And also because the notion of a separate Muslim quota, it also gives weight, it also gives power to the right-wing Hindu discourse. And there is a polarization moment always embedded when one talks about a separate Muslim quota. So the Pasmanda Muslims, they challenge this notion of a separate Muslim quota, and they would like a differentiated quota. Similarly, place caste groups across religious communities. They should be accommodated in different categories, SC, ST, OBC, and also EWS. So that is the broad sense in terms of affirmative action and quota politics. So they have also talked about political representation. Most Pasmanda Muslims, they have a sense that in Lok Sabha, in legislative bodies, whether it is Lok Sabha, Vidhan Sabha, or local bodies, the Ashraf Muslims, they're overrepresented, and the Pasmanda Muslims are underrepresented. I can come up with data, but because of I'm already reaching 40 minutes, so I will just conclude. So, yeah, so those are the three key critical categories, logics of the Muslim minority discourse: the notion of a monolithic religio-cultural identity, a certain understanding of communalism where the Muslim is projected as a pure victim, and this notion of reservations based on religious identity. All these three have been challenged by Pasmanda Muslim discourse with various logics, various arguments, and circulation of empirical data, and so on and so forth. And overall, the Pasmanda discourse, the aspiration of the Pasmanda discourse has been to transcend the limitations of the majority-minority dyad, the secularism-communalism dyad, the Hindu-Muslim dyad, and to move beyond that. And this is what I've called the post-minority paradigm or the post-minority condition in my work. And there's also a notion of, which I missed, I'm sorry I missed that, this notion of solidarity. So the Pasmanda movement has challenged this vertical solidarity on religious lines, and it has advocated for pan-religious solidarity of disenfranchised lower caste, as encapsulated in the slogan, Dalit Pichra Ek Saman, Hindu Ho Ya Musliman. And Ali Anwar also has a very negative valuation on the category minority. So I'll just read out one. So Ali Anwar says that the identity of Pasmanda Muslims was hitherto obscured in the name of the minority. Now we fear the word minority and feel that it is a fake, chalia word. In the name of a minority, either someone terrorizes us, that is the privileged caste Hindus, or someone snatches away our rights, that is the high caste Muslims. So the category minority is also challenged by the Pasmanda discourse. Yeah, so I'll stop here and we'll take up if there's anything I missed probably during the discussion.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like encourage participants to, if they have any question, doubt, please ask. Muhammad Mashkoor Alam has raised hand. You can ask question.
Thank you so much. Hello, sir. I just wanted to a little clarification on the sort of invisibilization of the Pasmanda movement in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. How do you see the the fading of the Pasmanda movement in these 4 decades and the moment gaining traction in post 90s period? So how should one as a student should inquire this period when he or she is studying Pasmanda movement from pre-independent India to the contemporary? Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yeah.
So would you like to collect a few questions or answer one by one?
I think we can answer one by one. If
Okay.
there is less, so we can probably towards the end we can collect a few questions, right?
Okay.
So,
Sir, adding to his question,
yeah.
I have to add in his question. So as he asked, there has been invisibilization of categories for a certain period of time. But when we see in post-Mandal period, there had been rise in Pasmanda movement. So they started to ask for their demand. But still in Indian academia and Indian politics, there has been invisibilization. And it is still, I would say, like going on, like it just came up when a minister has talked about it. So in academia, it has been since many decades. So what do you think? What has been the factors, or what has the civil society ignored it, or they considered it? They also considered Muslim as homogeneous identity, or what are your insights on that? Thank you.
Yeah. So if you look at the post 1950s period, so it's not only the lower caste Pasmanda movement, but also the Dalit and OBC movement, which were largely invisibilized. And the next spiral of social justice movement started from 1980s onwards with the constitution of DS4, Dalit Sangharsh Social Samiti by Manevar Kashiram ji, with the formation of the Bahujan Samaj Party in 85 or so, and especially with the publication of the works of Baba Saheb Ambedkar in the late 1980s. So it's not only that the Pasmanda movement or the lower caste Muslim movement, it was invisibilized from the 50s to the 80s period. But in general, if you look, the anti-caste movement was weaker. So Loya tried in the 1970s, Loya discourse, especially in Bihar and all, it gained some traction. But overall, the moment is 1980s onwards. And the impact of this ascendance of the anti-caste movement in the 1980s, the impact was also felt in the lower caste Muslim spheres. And that is where the Pasmanda movement was articulated. So in terms of academic invisibilization, I think academics generally follow the political success of movements. So it was even in the case of the Dalit movement. So when the Dalit movement was weak, there was hardly any academic reflection on that. But when the Dalit movement and the Bahujan movements, they strengthened after the Mandal movement. So most of the production on caste, it is post 1990s, if you look at the academic production. So academic reflection, academic theorization, it generally follows the political success of a movement or the political traction of a movement. So since Pasmanda was at the discursive level, it was weak in terms of organizational structure and it was weak in terms of impacting mainstream electoral politics. So it was not talked about. And now since, because of the last 20, 25 years of constant circulation, work by the Pasmanda practitioners, and the recent usage of the term by the Prime Minister PM Narendra Modi in the Hyderabad conclave. So it has gained some traction. There is more discussion on that. And so there is also academic reflection because a new field has opened up. And there is some semblance of success, some takers for the Pasmanda discourse. So I think that is how one explains that. So there's always a gap between the articulation of a movement, its sedimentation, its gripping the masses, and academic reflection. Academic reflection is usually comes at the last. It's very late.
You can ask question, Deepak Kumar.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. My question is to sir, related to sir. Since you were, talking about the Dalit movement, I wanted to understand little bit of, the Pasmanda Muslim, as well as the Dalit Muslims community, which is being highly debated, and the matter is still, pending in the Supreme Court. So I want to learn a bit more on that, sir. If that will be something, in this discourse, I will be looking forward. Thank you.
So Deepak, short answer is that I'm writing on the issue. It's a very complicated issue. In the next 2-3 days, probably my article will be there. So where I have discussed in detail the legal, anthropological, theological, and the political dimensions of the debate, right? So it's a slightly complicated issue. The question of reservations, of inclusion of Dalit Muslim and Dalit Christians within the SC category. So there are 3 broad sets of questions. The first, obviously, is the relation of caste with Hinduism. So caste is seen as a Hindu phenomenon. And this notion that Sikhism and Buddhism are offshoots of Hinduism. So caste applies to Hinduism, Sikhs, and Buddhism, but not to Islam and Christianity, because they are Abrahamic traditions or they are foreign traditions and so on and so forth. And this notion of untouchability, that untouchability is legitimized by Hinduism and is not there in the scriptures of Islam and Christianity. So that is the first frame. I'm challenging that in my article. I'll do that. The second is a set of this entire anxiety about convergence, right? This is something what one needs to deal with. And third are certain legal and constitutional arguments. So those are the 3 sets of arguments. It's a complicated debate, so I don't think I would like to go into that here. If you have any pointed question, then you can ask, because it's a long debate, and I'm working on a full-length article on that. But if there is any pointed questions that you feel during your research that you feel uncomfortable with or want to inquire further into it, then probably I could respond.
No, sir. I mean, particularly, I wanted to learn, the last set that you were discussing about. So, rather, I should wait for your article and the articulation that will become, and that will be, something to keenly watch. So,
Thank you.
There is a hand raised by Mukesh Thakur. You can ask your question. Mukesh, are you there? Okay. There is a question in chat box. I would like to read you. Sir, it's a question by Ayush Bhardwaj. Sir, would you care to elucidate on the BJP's recent attempt to make a vote bank out of Pasmanda-Muslim community?
Yeah, so if you look at the BJP's approach, so it is not only the Pasmanda community, but they have also tried to reach out to the Adivasi as a community, to non-Jatav communities in UP, to non-Yadav communities in UP and Bihar. So like a professional party, BJP is trying to expand its voter base, right? But obviously, those attempts are also discounted by the events on the ground. For example, there's a lot of violence against the Adivasis in Bastar and so on and so forth. So while there is violence, continuous violence against the Adivasis, because of the interest of the multinationals and big business houses in the forest and the forest minerals and so on and so forth. So on that count, the Adivasis, they are confronting coercion and brutality on a quotidian, on a daily level. At the same time, there's a talk of an Adivasi president, different kinds of symbolic integration of the Adivasi aspirational class. That is also what has happened within the OBCs and within the Dalits. So all the opposition parties, they have certain core constituencies, and whatever is remaining from the core constituency, BJP is trying to rope them in. So that is their strategy. But even in the recent, for example, if you look at lynchings, then most of the lynchings, the Muslim lynchings, the Pasmanda Muslims have been affected. Recently, the new violence is already going on, and if you look at the demolition of these shops and so on and so forth, most of those affected are the poor Muslims, mostly Pasmanda Muslims. So again, there is a tension. So at one level, they are incorporating the aspirational classes in all identities, the middle classes, who are very Catholic in terms of ideology, right? So they're very ambitious. They want to be integrated into the system, whether middle class academics or middle class politicians or middle class activists and so on and so forth. So the BJP, which is with its immense financial depth, an immense ideological and organizational depth, it is trying to incorporate, trying to seduce these aspirational groups within these communities. But on the other hand, the real marginalized within these communities, they are at the receiving end, whether they are Adivasis, whether they are Pasmandas, or whether they are most backward classes. So because of inflation, because of the shifts in the occupations in the market, because of unemployment, all these communities, they are very vulnerable, they are very marginalized. So it is working with this contradiction. So I think, not everyone will vote for it, but even if 2 or 3% in all these communities, they vote for BJP for whatsoever reason, it will increase its vote share. So I think that is what is there. So that is what the BJP is trying to do. As a professional party, it is trying to increase its vote share.
Sir, there is a question by Mukesh Thakur. Mukesh, would you like to ask it? Okay, I am reading it out. सर, एक नारा है, हिंदू हो या मुसलमान, पिछड़ा पिछड़ा एक समान. क्या इस प्रकार की यूनिटी संभव है? यदि है तो आप किस प्रकार की चुनौतियां देखते हैं?
तो मुकेश जी, ये कोई भी नारा होता है, जैसे लिबर्टी, इक्वालिटी, फ्रेटर्निटी, फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन में नारा आया, हम लोग जानते हैं कि जमीन पे ना तो लिबर्टी आई, ना इक्वालिटी आई, ना फ्रेटर्निटी आई उस तरह से. तो या हम लोग बराबरी की बात करते हैं या संविधान की बात करते हैं, तो हमेशा किसी भी नारे या किसी भी सॉलिडारिटी या एकता का जो प्रश्न होता है, वो एक यूटोपिया होता है. उसके अंदर एक हमारा एस्पिरेशन होता है, और हम लोग उसको एक वर्किंग प्रिंसिपल की तरह से लेके चलते हैं. जैसे हम लोग गैर बराबरी की बात करते हैं, लेकिन गैर बराबरी तो है हमारे समाज में, हम भले ही उसको बिटाने की बात करते हैं. हमारा संविधान भी बहुत सारी बातें करता है, लेकिन जमीन पे तो हर तरह की अनफ्रीडम्स और हर तरह की इनइक्वालिटीज या गैर बराबरियां मिलती हैं. तो नारा जो है दलित पिछड़ा एक समान, ये नारा काउंटर करने के लिए है धार्मिक एकताओं को, भले ही वो हिंदू एकता हो या मुस्लिम एकता हो, क्योंकि ये जो धार्मिक एकता है, इसकी वजह से जो पिछड़े दलित और आदिवासी जो समूह है, उनके जो एस्पिरेशंस हैं, उनके जो सामाजिक न्याय के मुद्दे हैं, वो दरकिनार हो जाते हैं, वो साइडलाइन हो जाते हैं. तो इसलिए ये एक ऑल्टरनेटिव, एक काउंटर हेजेमोनिक एकता की कोशिश है कि सारे जो दलित पिछड़े आदिवासी हैं किसी भी धर्म के, क्योंकि वो जाति को सहते हैं, जाति की टीस सहते हैं वो, और तमाम तरह के वो स्टिग्मा और इनविजिबलाइजेशन और इंफीरियराइजेशन सहते हैं, तो उनको एक छाते के नीचे लाने की कोशिश है. जाहिर सी बात है, ना तो मुस्लिम एकता कभी पूरी तरह से हो पाती है, ना हिंदू एकता हो पाती है. उसी तरह पिछड़ों और दलितों आदिवासियों की भी एकता उतनी आसान नहीं है, लेकिन कोशिश करते हैं लोग. तो एक वर्ग, एक पॉलिटिक्स एक खास तरह की एकता बनाने की कोशिश करता है. पसमानदा विमर्श जो है एक दूसरी तरह की एकता बनाने की कोशिश करता है.
Sir, there is a question of Shabi Rahat. My question is in addition to previous question in relation to new strategy of BJP to gain Pasmanda votes. And his question is, or her question is, I don't know, sorry. Adding to the question, I would like to know how you assume this community itself shall respond. What kind of negotiation can we look at?
So even the Pasmanda community is not monolithic. So the Pasmanda Muslims, they are divided into around 700 biradris all over India, right? And different biradris have different problems. They face different problems. For example, the Mayo Muslims, who are basically a pastoral community, the Mewati Muslims, or the one Gujar Muslims, who deal with dairy and other those kinds of occupations. Their problems are very different from the problems of the weavers, the Julahas or the Ansaris. The problems of Ansaris and the weavers is very different from the problems of the butchers, Qassab or the Qurayshis, right? So, in terms of even the Pasmanda space, it's a differentiated space. 700 caste communities, different caste communities have different issues. And even within these caste communities, there are class-based cleavages, there are gender-based cleavages. So the interest of the Ansari or Julaha women might not be always in consonance with the interests of Ansari or Julaha men. Also, the upper class Ansaris, the middle class Ansaris or Julahas, their interests would be very different from the average weaver who works on the handloom, who works in the handloom, right? So these are differentiated categories with sectional interests, different kinds of interests. So how BJP will perform, it will depend on region to region, in the way the Pasmanda communities are impacted because of social policy, because of violence, and so on and so forth. So it is not easy to predict. It is not easy to predict. But overall, I think it's very difficult for a big chunk of Pasmanda votes swaying towards the BJP. It would be a small section which might probably vote BJP for different reasons, right? For example, I'll give you an example. So this recent new violence, it is happening in a place in the location called the Ahirwal. Most of this region is known as the Ahirwal region, and it is dominated by the Mewati Muslims, but also by the Ahir or the Yadav Hindus. And if you recall, then there is a statement by one BJP minister, state minister, who has condemned this Bajrang Dal Yatra, right? He has condemned this Bajrang Dal Yatra because this BJP minister, some Mr. Singh, he comes from this Airwal region, and many new Muslims, many Mewati Muslims, voted for him in the Lok Sabha, right? So this is a very regional kind of a negotiation where you see that the Mewati Muslims, they are voting for this person from BJP because of certain regional relationships that the candidate may have with the Mewati Muslim community. So similarly, it will work differently in different places. But my sense, intuitive sense is that only a small section of Pasmandas will vote for the BJP. But obviously, because they are engaging with the Pasmanda question, they are engaging with the Pasmanda community. They are also supporting and funding a few Pasmanda activists and politicians. So their share will increase, but not drastically, not dramatically. That is my sense. I may be wrong because one cannot really predict in Indian politics. Things change very quickly.
Sir, there is a question by Shahbaz Malik. Sir, would you like to shed some light on the colonial practices which criminalize lower caste in general, but lower caste Muslims or Pasmanda Muslims in particular? As these words like bigoted Julaha was often used by colonial masters, the second question we often come across is the Indian Muslims have caste but not in Islam. So how do you see this dichotomy?
Okay, so on the criminalization of caste, so we know that colonial practice, any community which challenged the colonial regime, especially the Jats, the Gujars, and so on and so forth. So they were characterized as criminal tribes or criminal groups. So it is not that these were in general criminals, but probably there was there is this understanding that they challenged the colonial regime, and they were also regionally lived in a peripheral location and so on. In terms of this dichotomy that Islam is egalitarian, caste perspective. So one would have to see that how we understand religion. Can religion be understood in abstraction, or does religion have to be analyzed in connection with the state, in connection with political economy, and so on and so forth? So even if you look at the text, any text, whether it is Quran or the Bible or the Gita, it has a certain relationship with the context, right? So even in the Quran, because it's in Arabia of that time, and caste is not the operating principle there, but there are other kinds of hierarchies. For example, there are tribal hierarchies in Arabia. There are gender-based hierarchies, and so on and so forth. So you'll find those kinds of hierarchies legitimized in the Quranic text itself, right? Uh, and it's a complicated debate. But when Islam moves to Iran, then in Iran there was a well-oiled social stratification, and Muslim theology took a spin there, and many of these caste-based practices or these stratificatory practices, uh, they were legitimized by the Islamic jurisprudence, and so on and so forth. So this notion that Islam talks about equality, yes, equality, but spiritual equality. In terms of economic and political equality, if you look at slavery, then slavery was banned in 1922, after the Morocco Declaration. So slavery persisted in Islam for 1500 years. So the notion of equality, I think, is more spiritual equality rather than political and social equality. And if you look at for example, Dr. Ambedkar in his 22nd riddle, he talks about the notion of Brahmaism. So in terms of spiritual equality, one can even trace that spiritual equality in many Hindu classical texts itself. So again, one needs to understand and one needs to analyze and dig a bit deeper in some of these questions. But this notion that Islam is equality and Muslims practice caste, I think it is a half truth. So if you dig deeper, there would be other issues there in this formulation. Though I agree that this is the popular imagination of the Pasmanda. If you talk to any Pasmanda activist, they would say that Islam is equal, it is egalitarian, and Muslims are infected with caste. But I'm saying, because we are talking in an academic community, one needs to dig deeper. If Islam is about equality, what kind of equality, in what space and time context, how has Islam and Islamic theology operated in different regions, in different space and time contexts? So one has to articulate that and understand that.
I would ask participant to ask their question more than writing in chat box. Krishan Kant, you can ask your question if you are comfortable. Okay, I'll read out his question. सर, पसमांदा आंदोलन में महिला की भागीदारी कहाँ है? जातिगत आधार पर भेदभाव में महिलाओं के प्रश्न गौड़ हैं। यदि इस आंदोलन की मांग पूरी हो जाती है तो महिलाओं के हित में क्या बेहतर होने वाला है?
तो विमर्श के लेवल पे जो पसमांदा आंदोलन है, उसने लगातार महिलाओं के मुद्दे उठाए हैं। जैसे ट्रिपल तलाक में बहुत पहले ही अली अनवर साहब ने इसके खिलाफ पोजीशन ले ली थी, और पोलीगैमी के खिलाफ भी पोजीशन ली है पसमांदा आंदोलन ने, और महिलाओं की आज़ादी की बात की है। और लेकिन ये बात सही है कि संगठन में जो है महिलाओं का अभाव है। अभी भी पसमांदा समुदाय जो है काफी पितृसत्तात्मक हैं, काफी पेट्रियार्कल हैं, और उनको बहुत कोशिश करनी पड़ेगी कि महिलाओं को अपने आंदोलन में जोड़े। तो संगठन के स्तर पर जाहिर सी बात है महिलाओं की नुमाइंदगी नगण्य है, बहुत ज्यादा नहीं है, लेकिन विमर्श के तौर पे पसमांदा विमर्श ने महिलाओं के मुद्दों को काफी मजबूती से उठाया।
Fazan Mokim, you can ask your question.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Khalid Ansari. That was a really an insightful talk. So I have a couple of questions. Question one is around the idea of post-minority condition that you talked about, that you referred to towards the end of the talk. Where, I mean, is this, will there be, is there an attempt to overcome certain problematic diets or binaries that you pointed out in post-minority condition? Or is there an attempt to overcome binary thinking per se? So will there be, I suppose there will be other kinds of diets in post-minority conditions. So what I would like you to just hint at that too. And the second question is around, have you come across how literature, Urdu literature particularly, have dealt with this Pasmanda question? How have they represented in light in such historically in 20th century? And the third one is around, the third question is you were referring to like so I'll come to the third part after you. Sorry, sir. So, will it be okay?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. No issues. So in terms of the post-planetary condition, obviously there's an attempt to move beyond the hegemonic binaries. And the Pasmanda discourse has introduced new counter-hegemonic binaries to challenge the existing binaries. So again, the discourse is stuck within what you are suggesting as binary thinking, right? So can we move beyond binary thinking? I think that's a philosophical, it's an abstract issue. So one will have to make a distinction between the movement as such, the categories which the movement works with, and our own philosophical positions on that. So probably when we evaluate the movement, we could make a case, a philosophical case, for a non-binary thinking, for a more intersectional kind of understanding. But that would be a theoretical case. That would be an analytical case. The movement will work with its own binary, right? The movement works with its own binaries. And like all practitioners, I mean, many movements may not be very alert in terms of philosophical and reflexive and analytical thinking. So again, one has to make a distinction. As far as Urdu literature is concerned, so in fiction, obviously, there is some reference to caste in Urdu fiction. But in terms of the journalistic or academic writing in Urdu, I think they have invisibilized. They haven't paid any attention to the lower caste movements. And when I'm talking about Urdu literature, then I'm talking about the Ashraf, the literature produced by the Ashrafiya class. Obviously, there are Urdu writings by the Pasmanda themselves, which have challenged, even in 1920s onwards, have challenged the Deoband articulation on caste, Deoband articulation on Kufu. There have been community writings by Moment Conference practitioners, Moment Conference activists, and even now. So, for example, Masood Falai's work is in Urdu, Hindustan mein Zaat Paat aur Musliman. So, when we talk about Urdu, obviously we also have to talk about the positionality of various authors and writers. So, in terms of what could be said to be the Ashrafiya class, class of writers, intellectual academics, except for a few examples, I think most of them have not paid attention to the caste question. Yeah, so those were the two. Third one.
Thank you for the response. My third question is around, there are some voices in Pasmanda discourse who are arguing that one should differentiate Pasmanda from the Muslims. And they, for example, Ayub Rahim from Bihar, Darbhanga, he makes a case that we need to differentiate, and there has to be a politics around differentiation also. So what in the way you have talked in this particular lecture, so it seems to me as if the Dalit question would come under this this broad categorization of Pasmanda-Muslim.
So there is a confusion there. I got your question. So there is a confusion there, and the confusion is that they conflate the Pasmanda category with the backward Muslims. So in Ayub Rahim's articulation, or in articulation of certain other Pasmanda activists, they think that the Pasmanda refers to the backward Muslims, right? So if the Pasmanda refers to the backward Muslims, then obviously Dalit Muslim becomes a separate category. What Ali Anwar and what I have tried to argue is that Pasmanda is an umbrella category which includes the backward Muslims, the Adivasi Muslims, and the Dalit Muslims. And obviously, the principle of graded inequality, it works in Muslim society also. So the backward Muslims would be more dominant when compared to the Dalit Muslims or when compared to the Adivasi Muslims. Even within the backward categories, the Julahas or the Ansaris would be more dominant when compared to the Qurayshis or when compared to the Safis or when compared to the other communities. So graded inequality works even within the Muslim social sphere. So what Ayub Ain Saab is saying, that Dalit Muslims are one of the most marginalized within the Pasmanda category. So they need to be treated differently. I would completely agree with him. Because the condition of the Halalkhor Muslims, the Bakho Muslims, the Lalbegi Muslims, they're absolutely alienated. They're nowhere in the political sphere. And these are micro communities with very small numbers. And the first past the post electoral system, it is not at all sensitive to them. So even if the Pasmanda movement becomes successful, just like the OBC movement or the Dalit movement, it is some communities which have significant numerical demographic populations that will be able to benefit from the political sphere. But micro communities with very small, insignificant populations, they can never make their mark in the first past the post electoral system where numbers count. So it is not only about Dalit Muslims, it is about peripheral communities in the OBCs, in Adivasis, with very low numbers. So they are never able to really find a place in the political sphere. So one would have to move beyond the first past the post system to a proportional electoral system, but that is a separate discussion, because unless the first past the post system is challenged and we have a new electoral system, which is the proportional electoral system, these micro communities with very small numbers, with a demographic deficit, they can never be included in the political sphere. So to say that Dalit Muslims, Adivasi Muslims, backward Muslims, they have different interests, yes, obviously, because graded inequality works there. But again, there is a common feature which combines all these three categories. It is that they are all persecuted on the basis of caste. So that is the unifying factor, conceptually unifying, not empirically unifying. Because empirically, like I already mentioned, empirical reality is very different from our conceptual articulation. And there is always a utopian element in politics where we use certain logics, certain categories to unify as a principle, as an operating principle. So, yeah.
So then it is perhaps expedient for this politics to become a real substantial politics. Then it needs to bring together all those under a singular umbrella, right?
Not only Pasmanda politics, Indian politics in general has to be more sensitive to the micro. Right now, if you look at what is known as Bahujan politics, there are only 15 to 20 castes in the nation which have been included in the political sphere. Yadav, Koiris, Kurmis, Jatavs, Namashudras, Mahars, Malas. So they can be counted in fingers, while there are 2,500, 3,000 caste communities. Are they represented? No. So it works because why are they not represented? Because the political system is very insensitive to micro communities, those communities which have a demographic deficit. So it is not only about Pasmanda, it is about Indian politics. And that is because of the first past the post system. First past the post system is absolutely insensitive to the micro communities. And that is why whenever we talk about democratic deepening, whenever we talk about democratic expansion, we also have to challenge the first past the post system at some point.
Thank you, Professor Ansari. And it also reminded me how Ali Anwar also says that in one of his interviews, how this idea of Pasmanda is not limited to Muslims only. This will go further and to incorporate other marginal communities. So it may seem to be related to Muslims only, but in fact, in principle, it is not. Maybe so to say, in the first phase of this movement, it is addressing Muslim issues, but it may end up covering all those every marginal community in India.
It's just like the term Bahujan. So Bahujan can include Muslims. So one could say the Pasmanda-Muslims are Bahujan. And one can also say that Bahujan Hindus are Pasmanda. Right? So it signifies a certain discrimination, certain stigmatization on the basis of caste. And that has been the argument, that caste is not a Hindu phenomenon. It is a South Asian phenomenon, which cuts across religious communities. So if we take that principle, the basic principle of the Pasmanda movement, then obviously we are talking about pan-religion lower caste, marginalized groups, those kinds of solidarities we're talking about. So Pasmanda or Bahujan can include the laboring classes, the lower caste, the women, and so on and so forth. So all oppressed communities can be included in this umbrella.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, there is a question by person named Jamia Things. Sir, in your opinion, can secularization, which is stigmatized, by a way to solve socio-cultural inequalities within Muslim community, since these inequalities are more a result of societal concern than a religious concern?
I didn't follow the question. Can you repeat? It looks like a complicated question to me, but can you just repeat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. I think he's asking, can you throw some light on secularism and Pasmanda movement? He again commented, or she commented.
Okay. So, secularism can be dealt at multiple levels. One is at the conceptual level. I won't go into that. In terms of the Pasmanda movement, what are called as labeled as the secular parties. So the Pasmanda practitioners, they have questioned these parties because in the guise of secularism, what they are doing is basically Ashraf appeasement. So most of these political parties like BSP, Samajwadi Party or the Congress, they give tickets to the Ashraf Muslims disproportionately. And also within their party structure, it is the Ashraf Muslims that are overrepresented. So in that sense, the Pasmanda discourse, it challenges these secular parties or this notion of secularism. BJP says it is Muslim appeasement, right? BJP says that secularism is Muslim appeasement. But the Pasmanda says it is not Muslim appeasement, it is Ashraf appeasement, right? So that is the critique from the Pasmanda side.
So there is one last question in chat box by Akhilesh Kumar. Why there is a fear with other social justice parties to raise issue of Pasmanda Muslims and issue of Dalit who adopted Islam? By the way, Kumari Mayawati supported Dalit Muslim and Dalit Christian reservation. After that, there is no strong voice from the social justice parties.
Yeah, because political parties want to win elections, and there is a sense that within Muslims, the Ashraf Muslims are hegemonic. They control most of the madrasas, religious institutions, the academics, the NGO sector, and so on and so forth, the academic sector. So there is a clear sense, and the social justice parties are not wrong, completely wrong on that count, that the Muslim society in general is controlled by the Ashrafs. Though there is a challenge now, but it's still widely controlled by the Ashrafs. So they think if they raise the caste question, then the Ashraf Muslims will be furious and probably it will have some impact in the elections. So probably they will sway the Muslim votes away from these secular parties. So that is the fear that with which the mainstream centrist and social justice parties work with. So the onus is on the Pasmanda movement. So and they're trying. So there's always a gap between the articulation of a movement, the enactment of a movement, and its sedimentation, its political success. So we are, as a movement, Pasmanda movement is not where it was in 1998. So the discourse has traveled, the discourse has gripped people, it is increasingly gripping the Pasmanda sections, and there will come a moment when the movement will be a political success. At that point, it will be very difficult for the social justice and parties like the Congress to discount and to invisibilize the Pasmanda demands. But maybe that time is not now, maybe it will come later. But that's an instrumentalist strategic approach of the social justice and centrist parties. It's not a normative, it's not a principled position.
Is there any other question? You can ask your question.
I have one more question to ask you, sir, again. So, in terms of the Pasmanda movement, what we see is there is a lot of political debate. Or as someone who is reading the newspaper or the writings, it is mainly focused or centered around the political debate or the political side of the movement. But I want to ask you, in terms of the institution building, what sort of institutions that we need to sort of garner popular support and to give or to provide momentum to the Pasmanda movement, and 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 taking precedents from the 1980s OBC movement, like Chaudhry Charan Singh, what he did, he sort of nomenclated the OBC movement as the Kisan movement. And so in terms of the fallibility of this Pasmanda movement, do we have any vision to sort of go with or to inquire further?
Yeah, so in terms of the institutional building has been generally weak, uh, not only in the Pasmanda movement, but even in the Bahujan movement. So because, uh, like you already said, the political has outweighed the social, right? So usually most of the Pasmanda and the Bahujan activists, they are largely interested in electoral politics. Uh, but the more difficult task of institution building and community upliftment in the sphere of education, in the sphere of livelihoods, uh, and in the sphere of change in cultural value system, the normative system, and so on and so forth. So usually these movements have been weak on that count. So there's a gap. There's always a tension between the political and the social, and the political usually gets foregrounded at the expense of the social. So, like you said, the social uh, has to be emphasized, and that is a weakness of the movement. But one cannot. I mean, one will one will have to see how it pans out in the future. I see some indications. I see some Pasmanda sections now starting universities, starting schools, NGOs. I've visited Maharashtra recently, in Kerala, in UP, around Muzaffarnagar. A number of new NGOs have come up, which are working with the Pasmanda sections. But it is still a marginal phenomena, right? But I see those kinds of community engagements now happening. So it's a good sign. It's a welcome sign that there is some articulation, some intervention beyond the electoral sphere in the social sphere. It's a welcome sign, but it's still very early to say how it will pan out in the future.
And sir, uh, in this similar vein, I want to ask you, it is also largely and heavily based on the upper caste bashing. I would say the on ground movement that I see people talking on the YouTube channels and on, it is largely reliant on the bashing of the upper caste or the Ashraf Muslims. So in that sense, do you not think that it should also move beyond the traditional sort of
Yeah, so
discursivities
that,
of
yeah.
yes, sir. I
Yeah,
think
Mashkur, please, Mashkur, sorry for interruption. Please finish your question, then I'll start.
I think, sir, I have conveyed my question in the sense that it is the way it is heavily politically articulated, and also in the social context of it, that what we see is it is becoming more and more upper caste Muslim bashing sort of movement. So will it be then defeatist in its approach, or then become more? What should it do to become more pragmatic in its outlook and approach, sir?
So, I mean, so when we talk about politics, there's always a populist element in politics, where any political movement it simplifies, dichotomizes the political space into us and them, right? Uh, so no political movement that I know does not have a sense of an enemy or a foe, and so on and so forth. So, example, there is a lot of Brahmin bashing in the Dalit and Bahujan movements. In Pasmanda movement, there is a lot of Ashraf Sayyid bashing. So there are these feelings of ressentiment uh, in most of these movements. I think there will come a time when people will realize that such neat binaries do not really capture the experience completely. Uh, I personally, I mean, to say that a particular community is hegemonic is one thing. To question the structural inequalities is also one thing, and to bash an entire community, uh, to be complicit in certain kind of structural inequality, I think that is a very limited intervention. So I won't agree with this politics of ressentiment beyond a point. Uh, So yes, I mean, so that's a problem. That's a problem with all political movements. So all political movements work with us and them. They all have an emotional, passionate, populist side to these movements. In order to mobilize a community, one creates, invents, and creates some enemies, some figure against whom one could mobilize. I don't know any politics whether they have been able to overcome that. So if you look at Marxist politics, the capitalist bashing happens. In Hindutva politics, Muslim bashing happens. In Islamic politics, Hindu bashing happens. In Dalit politics, Brahmin bashing happens. In feminist politics, male bashing happens. So I have not seen any movement which is really free from this politics of ressentiment. And Pasmanda movement is no exception. But how to deal with it, what kind of resources can we employ to paraphilize this kind of bashing and become more intersectional and so on and so forth? That is something we need to think about. I don't have easy answers.
So if there are no any other question, I would like Ganesh to do vote of thanks.
Okay. So, on behalf of speaking from margin, I would like to thank our participants who have created a vibrant environment by asking questions and listening. And also thanks to KP for moderating this session. And finally, I would like to thank Professor Khalid Ansari, who has given very wonderful lectures by explaining the abstract conceptualizations of Pasmanda and the anthropological politics from the everyday aspects. So I would like to thanks again for giving your time. And we have one announcement. In few days, in 2-3 weeks, we will have one sessions on the topic dispositions, border and state of exception in South Asia by Dr. Nasrin Chaudhary and Biswajit Mahanti. So keep in touch with us. Okay, thank you, Professor Khalid again for your time.
Thank you, Ganesh and Kaifi, and speaking from Margin Group for having me. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, sir.